everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So how are you feeling today? Are the conversations, protests, and constant news coverage about race in America wearing you down? Perhaps you're feeling angry and annoyed with people who deny that there's a race problem in this country. Are you frustrated because your colleagues at work, your neighbors, your friends are all tiptoeing around you, afraid of saying the wrong thing? Maybe you're just sad because all of this is just too much. Perhaps you're suffering from racial trauma. Up next on Another View, a candid conversation about race-based trauma and how we can protect our mental health. Stay tuned. Another View will be right back after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. We'll talk with licensed clinical professional counselor Pamela LaVeist Bell about protecting our mental health from racial trauma in just a moment. But first, guess what? Today is the soft kickoff to our WHRV-FM membership drive. Now, I cannot let an opportunity go by for our wonderful listeners of Another View to support what you love, which is our show. In respect of our current climate, our end-of-the-year membership drive is only 4 days, starting tomorrow and ending on Monday. But I know you know how important your membership is to keep Another View and all of our programming on the air. So if you call 1-800-940-7170, 1-800-940-7170, or go online to whro.org. From now until 1 o'clock, your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar up to $1,000. Now, let's show the world, and yes, I mean the world, because we have people from everywhere listening to us via the internet, that our listeners love our show and want to support it by becoming a member. Lisa, Todd, and I thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your support. So call right now and let's kick off this drive in a huge way. I know my Another View listeners, you come through every time. So make that call right now, 1-800-940-7170, or go to whro.org and support what you love, Another View. Thank you so much. Racial trauma, also known as race-based traumatic stress, refers to the stressful impact or emotional pain of one's experience with racism and discrimination. It can show up as increased vigilance and suspicion, increased sensitivity to threat, a sense of a foreshortened future, aggression, substance abuse, negative moods, and depression. It affects us physically, including hypertension and coronary heart disease. It's serious, but it can be managed. Here to talk with us about racial trauma is licensed clinical professional counselor Pamela LaVeist Bell. Her practice, Serenity Pastoral Counseling Center, is located in Reisterstown, Maryland, which is right outside of Baltimore, in case you don't know. How are you doing, Pam?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on the show, Barbara. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we were excited about having you, and I know it's been a long time coming because we originally had you scheduled, I believe it was in March, and with everything with the pandemic and everything changing our schedule, so we're really happy to have you on today. So first I want to ask you a question. The president of the American Psychological Association says, and I quote, "We are living in a racism pandemic." What do you think about that statement? Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes, I agree. And we have been in a hostile environment as Black people for quite some time, but it is just really being exposed a little bit more in this year of 2020. We are getting a clearer vision of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So define racial trauma for us. I gave the clinical description in the introduction, but I want to break it down in layman's terms. Explain to people what we mean when we say that they are suffering with racial trauma.
Well, racial trauma is ongoing, overabiding sense of being degraded and undervalued in the society that you're meant to operate and function in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an uncertainty that comes with just everyday things like, should I go into a certain neighborhood, or what's going to happen on the job? It's just about consistently suppressing feelings of not being valued, fearfulness, and it's a constant state of being in a emotional distress.
Mm.
And we've learned how to function under those conditions. So that's the way I would describe it.
But even as we function under those conditions, it does something to us mentally and physically. So what are some of the ways that it kind of peaks out, if you will, and shows itself, as much as we try to hide it?
One of the ways that I see mostly in my practice is emotional numbing. So that's not acknowledging or being able to even identify what you're feeling at any given time because of constantly suppressing how you feel. The ways that we see is rage, anger reactions. People that it may seem like they're overreacting to situations, but it's the buildup of all these suppressed emotions. It's also constant worrying and anxiety that comes from racial trauma. Sometimes people struggle with, being able to get motivated because there's a sense of hopelessness that comes with being traumatized that way.
And so, Pam, not only does it affect us individually, then if we're in a relationship or if we have children, how we relate to others, that becomes an issue too?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Because sometimes, the saying, Barbara, that easier, you always hurt the ones you love. It's easier to show what you're feeling to the people that are closest to you and act out some of those suppressed emotions. And so it can affect the relationship.
So it's a lot for us to have to deal with. So some people equate it to post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Is it the same thing or is it different?
Yeah, there is also, there's a phrase called post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And it's a little different because we're all based on our history in America and the history of being oppressed. So it's a little, it's being passed down, so it's transgenerational. So this trauma is being passed through from generation to generation. So it's not individualized. It is Black people as a whole that experience this trauma. So I would say it is similar symptoms and signs that you would see, but it is different because of the nature and the historical background.
So can white people suffer from racial trauma?
I think that white people do suffer from racial trauma because some of the sense of privilege is a false sense of self, and that's one of the symptoms of trauma, the false sense of self.
Hadn't thought about it that way. That's interesting. So if somebody comes to you and they say, I can't sleep, or I'm screaming at my spouse for no reason, or I'm irritable, or I'm not getting along with my people at work. I mean, how do you talk with them, and how do you determine that racial trauma is part of the issue?
Well, I think when, if it's an African-American person that comes in, a Black person that comes in, I automatically consider the social, issues that we face whenever they're speaking. But I would mostly focus in on the immediate situation, which is more, those are signs of emotional distress. So I would look at the immediate situations that they're facing, knowing that in the background that there is a historical references that we need to consider as well. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did. It did. So what are some of the coping mechanisms? What do you tell people to do? as they start to deal with this?
As they start to deal with
The
racial
racial
trauma?
trauma, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think most importantly is to acknowledge that is there. And what I'm finding that a lot of, some people try to manage it by not acknowledging the issue, by avoiding conversations about it or not, paying attention to, spending too much time looking at what's happening in the world around them. So first, most importantly, is to acknowledge what's happening. And then once you acknowledge it, find people that you can express what's going on. So talking and communicating about what you feel and how you feel about it and how it's affected you. Also, what's important is to be gentle with yourself. Give yourself the permission to heal. Be okay with getting therapeutic help, because sometimes in our community it's difficult to take that step. It's changing now, Barbara. I'm starting to see a change. Yes, there's a change. But historically, because of racial trauma, we have not really trusted going to therapists. We've learned in our community to try to kind of keep our business to ourselves. We were all taught in our home, most of us, was what goes on in this house stays in this house. So keeping your feelings to yourself and can also numb them out, and that you're not even able to identify what you're feeling. So that's where people begin to act out what they're feeling. So acknowledging what you feel, talking about it. If you don't have people around you that you can, honestly and openly talk about it with, seek professional help. And pay attention to the signs of distress, the physical, emotional, and mental signs of the distress that you might be feeling if they're ongoing. And I like to say that if you start to see these symptoms for more than a week, that you should be seeking professional help.
So that's a good benchmark for more than a week. So, I was involved in a conversation yesterday with some women, and people were sharing how they were feeling and what was going on in terms of what's going on. And a mother mentioned that she had to spend time telling her teenage son, as she put it, putting out his light. In other words, instead of encouraging him to show his greatness and to be as open and gregarious as he was, that because she was so worried about his safety, that she would tell him, don't wear a hoodie. Don't put yourself out there too much. Don't be polite. Don't put your hands in your pocket. I mean, we're telling our kids over and over, don't do this, don't do that, to a point where are we then passing on this trauma because we're so worried about their physical safety?
Yes, I believe that's one of the ways that we do it. And, inadvertently, it's not our desire to do that, but safety comes first. And we know that especially, with the younger Black males, if they draw too much attention to themselves, you almost want them to feel invisible. But we've heard that for years. And that's pretty much, how a lot of people have survived, is by dimming their light.
Wow. By being invisible. 440-2665 is the number to call to join our conversation. How are you dealing with the trauma of all of the things that are happening in this community, in our world right now? 440-2665 is the number to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have about racial trauma, and how are you, do you think that you're experiencing it? Have you experienced it? What are you doing to protect your mental health? So, Pam, there are those of us who work in this space. I mean, you're a counselor. There are news people who are out there every single day covering this. Myself, as a talk show host that deals with African American issues, how do we protect ourselves? Because we professionally have to be in this space, but yet we also are African American human beings who are living the same trauma.
Yeah, we do have to protect ourselves because, we are in this. I was just thinking when you spoke about the woman with her son,
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to my son about it. I have sons myself, and I'm always concerned about how they manage in this world. And, instead of just, when they leave from visiting me, instead of saying, see you later, like most mothers would do, I'd say be very, very careful.
Wow.
That's what I say all the time, and I pray for them all the time.
Mm.
And I was speaking to one of my sons, and he had said, this. I'm just going to read what the quote that he made to me. He said, being a black man in America means that I have to associate and do business with white people. I have to spend a lot of energy suppressing feelings that I have about what's going on, or else I can lose social connections and lose money. And it's so hard for me to know who is who that I can't really open up and share how I feel.
Wow.
So he said, I'm not even sure if I can go to the store. Or should I go to the store? I have to make decisions about that. And every day I pray that I'm not the next hashtag. So I just wanted to share that. And that's what he said. But to answer your question about what we can do is that, we always talk about the village. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village for all of us, even beyond childhood. So we have to find our village and connect with other Black people who are also willing to talk about what's going on.
It's interesting that your son mentioned, should I go to the store? Should I do things? And I've shared this in other forums. On top of everything that's going on racially, then we have to also deal with COVID. And when in Virginia and in Maryland, obviously, you have to wear masks. And, my husband and I had a whole conversation about what it was going to be like for him to go into a store with a mask on.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is a conversation that probably other Black families have had to have, but not necessarily other white families, because it's just not a part of a consciousness, but we have to be conscious of that. And that I think that hypervigilance of, where we are and how we look and how we act in these situations, also add to the trauma.
Yes. Yes. And it's constant, and you're in a constant state of fight or flight. It's just so, emotionally, physically, it's just tension, constant tension. And it's very rare that you get to relax. You have to find places where you can relax, because as we've seen, that people can be at home relaxing and still get killed.
Yeah.
Someone can knock on your door, and it immediately causes an alarm to go off in your mind, if you didn't expect company.
And honestly, that is something. So even the doorbell ringing at this point could mean something totally different than what the norm would be.
Yes, that's right.
Wow, that's incredible. Let's go to our phones. They are ringing off the hooks. 440-2665 is the number to call. Courtney joins us from Chesapeake, and I believe this is Courtney Cottrell, who's been on our show before. Is that right?
It is. How are you doing?
Good, Courtney. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Good. So to join, did you have a question you wanted to ask or a statement?
I just wanted to share some insight because as soon as I saw the topic, I said, it is always relevant out in the civilian world, but in the inside of the military, even though everything looks like it's wonderful and we have it together, the military, it's a struggle 10 times over, because being a junior person, a minority of color in the military, you're pretty much in the corner, just shutting up and coloring. You know what I mean? You have the same fears. As I was listening to the interview earlier, the racial trauma. A lot of us come in to the military with that same stigma. You're already scared and not trusting and looking at people sideways. And it kind of, makes it worse when the people in senior leadership don't look like you. Whether you're a woman or a minority, and it kind of confirms, that, if you're of color, minority or whatever, you're not going to make it past a certain point. So immediately, kids are shut down when they come in, and they still have the worries and the fear of the discrimination inside, the military, and then have to turn around and be on the outside and worrying about the same thing, going to a grocery store. You have to, make your decisions wisely throughout the day. If I go over here, do I have to brace myself for shock and be ready for somebody to approach me or accuse me or, just come at me sideways for no reason? And it should not be that way, but it's sad that we're in a state where, and I don't think, it's not anything new at all. It's just the fact that now it's being exposed for what it is. Now people have the courage to stand up and say, I'm not taking it anymore. Now people are showing you their true colors, and we're starting to realize it. And I think we have the right generation today who are impatient and want instant gratification, where they're going to go out there and they're going to fight for what is right.
Okay. And how did you deal with the trauma when you were in the service?
Well, I'm still in, and it's sad because the suppression part is real. Because when you wake up in the morning, you suppress everything. Like when I go into work, I dare not speak about the protests that are going on because it might be, you and two other minorities in that office, and an office full of all Caucasian men, and you don't know who is looking at you sideways like, oh, there goes another one. So you don't want to take a chance of bringing up a conversation because that conversation is not going to go the way you intended it to go. So you have to keep your feelings and how you feel on the inside suppressed, go to work, do your job, and then when you come home, now you can breathe. Now you're on social media. Now you're watching the news. Now you're calling your brothers and your uncles and your moms, and you're crying and talking to see if they're okay. We're dual-hatted, and we are stretched out thin being a part of the military where, sometimes you can't even say anything because you can't trust the people that are there because you don't know what their background is and how they were raised.
Gotcha. Let's get some reaction from Pam. Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, I'm so glad that she shared that because that's a perspective that we don't always know about. I mean, what's going on. But anywhere that Black people are, we are all feeling we're going through the same distress, the same feelings of we can be next. And so I'm glad that you shared that, sister, because that helps bring even more to the conversation.
Courtney, thanks so much for the call. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, you too. 440-2665 is the number to call to join our conversation. David joins us from Norfolk. Hi, David. You're on the air.
Hey, Miss Hamley. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Good.
I like the comment the therapist made about how we're not encouraged to seek help from therapists. I saw a post that said Black men in particular are made fun of for seeking help for anxiety or depression. And this fool below posted, as well we should be. We don't have time for weakness. And that kind of mentality is contributing to the problem. I mean, if you broke your leg, you couldn't just keep on trucking. You'd have to have the bones set, put in a cast, etc. And it's the same thing with mental health. The mental health affects the physical health. Also, I've heard a lot of Black people say, I don't need therapy, I've got Jesus. No, you have Jesus, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have therapy. I mean, God put psychiatrists down here for a reason. Am I right?
Let's let Pam respond to that because I know this is right up her alley. Go ahead, Pam.
Right. I'm a pastoral counselor, and that's exactly right. God anoints, and He chooses to prepare us as pastoral counselors, Christian counselors, all type of faith-based counseling that's available, so there's no more excuses that people can use. Getting therapy is not a lack of faith. It's actually an act of faith because you're saying that I am willing to face the struggles and the trials that I'm feeling, and I'm not just going to sit here and try to self-medicate by, food or drinking or, whatever it is, shopping. People use all kinds of ways to self-medicate that are self-destructive. So, yes, that
You know what,
counseling
Pam?
is very much an act of faith.
Absolutely.
And
I want to address David's other question about men, Black men coming to therapy in just a moment. But so hold on to that thought. David, thanks so much for the call. But right now, if you're just joining us, we're talking about the effects of race-based traumatic stress with licensed clinical professional counselor Pamela LaVeist Bell with Serenity Pastoral Counseling. We're also encouraging you to become a member of WH WHRV-FM and show your support of Another View. We have a $1,000 challenge for this hour. Call 1-800-940-7170 or go to WHRO.org and become a member today. Help us kick off our end of the year membership drive in a huge way, and we sure thank you for your support. And I'm wondering, Jonah, do we have any numbers yet? We have not heard back from Pledge Central yet. Okay, so we'll let you know how we're doing, but please give us a call, 1-800-940-7170 or WHRO.org. Pam, I want to go back to David's question about Black men in particular and counseling. What are you finding? Are they willing to come in? And if they're not, what can we as women do to encourage them?
When I started my practice, which was back in 2006, most men or Black men were coming in because they were coming for couples counseling. So they were pretty much being dragged in there by their significant other, and they were not necessarily as open initially to the process. But as time goes on, and a lot of those couples, the men would come by themselves eventually once they start to see the benefit of it. Now, especially the younger generation, maybe, I'm saying younger based on where I'm at right now, but I would say men in their 40s on down are more likely to call and make appointments just for themselves. So I am seeing a significant change in counseling for Black men and Black women. What was the other thing you wanted me to answer?
Yeah, that was it. He just wanted. His point was we need, when someone said, that going to counseling means that you're weak. That doesn't mean you're weak. That's a sign of strength, isn't it?
It is. It is a sign of strength. It says that, you are willing to change. You are willing to improve your condition. You are looking to be healthy, not just physically healthy, but mentally healthy. And when a man, if he has a family, if he's healthy, then it's more likely that his family is going to get healthy.
Absolutely. We just lost our next call I was getting ready to take. 440-2665 is the number to call us. Leland joins us from Virginia Beach.
Yeah, I was just going to throw up for discussion the cannabis issue, and now that July 1st, it's going to be decriminalized.
Leland, that's not our topic that we're talking about today. I appreciate the call. So when we talk about the legalization of marijuana, we'll be sure to get you back on. So thanks so much for the call. So I want to ask you, Pam, we had talked about some ways you were saying to kind of get away on your own or try to think some positive thoughts. I want to give people some more concrete things that they can do if they think that they really are suffering from racial trauma.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to just also say something about the question you asked earlier about what can we do when we realize that we're facing racial trauma and we come to. So we've talked about coming together. And one of the things that we must do is allow ourselves to grieve, to come together with other African Americans, Black people that are around us, and allow ourselves to pour out the emotions, the grief that we feel when we see a loss, when we see, a murder like what we saw with Floyd on TV, and all of the situations that we see. Allow ourselves to grieve, because the grieving process is a cleansing process. It's a freeing process. It's a healing process. And we really have learned that's one of the signs of transgenerational trauma from slavery, is that we've learned to contain our grief. We've learned to suppress our grief. Unless it's someone directly connected to us, our family members, then it's okay. But collectively, we have not been allowed to grieve. So look for people that are willing to experience that with you. It's okay to grieve. But you said you wanted some more concrete things that people can do. And there are some things. One of the things that I found personally that works for me, and I've been recommending to my clients, is to connect with nature.
Take a walk.
When you connect with nature, you are being more present in the moment. Our hunter-gatherer, orientation about learning when we were out in nature more, you learn to pay attention to what's going on around you. So oftentimes we just get in our cars or we, go from place to place, and we're always living in the future of where we have to be and what we have to do. So instead of rushing off like that, especially now that we are slowed down anyway because of COVID and everything, take a moment and walk in nature and look at the beauty of nature, what God has created for us. Watch the birds, the freedom,
the birds, absolutely.
Experience that. Look at the trees, the greenery, the flowers, the sky, the beauty of the sky, and spend some time. So I'm even doing nature walks with some of the people that I'm working with now. I have a group of women, and we do nature walks, and it's very soothing. It's very, peaceful. Gives a sense of peace.
And it pulls us away from the social media and from the television and from the constant reminder of everything that's happening to us. Exactly.
And speaking of that, I also suggest that people do not load their minds with news, watching the news, and taking in all of that information all day. Because some people will sit in front of the news all day long and just take it in, and that's not healthy. It's not. It becomes counterproductive after a while.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to the phone lines, 440-2665. Ben joins us from Portsmouth. Hi, Ben. You're on the air.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I always enjoy your show here.
Thank you.
I called in after hearing the statement that she does not believe there could ever be a white racial trauma.
No, she said that white people could, actually. But go ahead. Make your statement?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a mixed race inner city here in Norfolk, and when I was in the 70s, it was bussed over to Booker T as for equality and stuff, and went through racial harassment and assaults almost weekly. And when I complained to the administration about it, it was either not acted on or shrugged off. And I guess, in follow-up years, I'm a carpenter subcontractor, and I found myself year after year going after projects that were limited by me not being a minority business enterprise. And a lot of times I would team up with one of my African-American buddies from school and have him be the prime so we could go get it. But, I mean, racial discrimination is institutional and blatant right now. I mean, if you want to see an example, look at the Sunday Virginian pilot. All of the invitation for bids there all require minority enterprise participation, but then over half of them are just exclusive for minority business, which to thousands of white guys like me that grew up poor inner city is basically just saying, no white guys need apply. And you've got a whole generation now of people like me who've gone through this since the 70s, throughout our entire career. I mean, there was never, my father was blue collar. I never went to college, but I never really felt any privilege at all. But I feel like from the moment I was in high school throughout my career, being white wasn't a privilege. It was a detriment to my career.
Okay, let me let our guests respond to you, Ben. Thank you so much for your call and for your honesty. Pam?
Yes, thank you for that comment. And I was, when I heard what he was saying, I could hear some of the same things the same emotions that I hear coming from African Americans. And it really goes to show that the human condition is of great concern. and that it's important that we move beyond the racial issue and look at the distress that is causing all of us. So I'm wondering if, I wish he was still on the line, if he had considered connecting with some of his African-American buddies and joining forces against discrimination in general. Sometimes we look at the other, sometimes people in his position might look at, well, Black people are taking all the jobs away, or those people, or Mexicans are taking all. But the fight is not necessarily against color; it's against discrimination and oppression.
And the system. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 440-2665. Give us a call. Join our conversation. Vernon joins us from Newport News. Hi, Vernon. You're on the air.
Hi. How you doing?
Okay.
All right. I was calling to see what did your guests think about. I recently, I'd say in the last 2 years, being a grandparent, I thought about the use of spanking and what it does to how we as a group of people tend to use physical punishment a lot more and with a lot older group of kids. And I think it's a residue of the punishment and physical restraint to control behavior from slavery that we as family members have carried over to how we parent our children.
Which is another form of that intergenerational trauma.
Which is the post-traumatic slavery syndrome. That is a good term, I think. So I just wanted to hear what the speaker
Okay.
thinks.
Pam, you want to respond?
Okay. By the way, post-traumatic slave syndrome was coined by Dr. Joy DeGruy, so I don't want to take credit for that. But I agree, and I'm just going to speak from a personal perspective. I raised 4 children, and I consciously did not use corporal punishment, beating, spanking on a regular basis. I thought that should be saved for something that was extreme, and that was the last resort. And, if you speak with them, they might have gotten hit once or twice, because it is. I looked at it as it is a form of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And there are other ways to discipline children. And if you discipline them early on and not wait until things get out of hand, then, you don't have to resort to spanking and taking the switch and the whip and all of that, because it is reminiscent of our past in slavery.
Pam, I want to ask you a question. How do we, part of the trauma, racial trauma, is distrust. And it's distrust of white people because we just don't know what to expect. And people who suffer from this type of trauma expect the worst all the time. How do we start to rebuild trust?
I think what's most important is that we begin to rebuild trust in God and trust in ourselves. I don't think our focus should be external. It should be internal and working on building our confidence. I like to call it Godfidence, for some people who may not be focused in on their relationship with God, but at least self-confidence. So the stronger you are internally and the more you can rely on what you bring to the table, the less concerns you have, because we already know the history. So it's already clear what's going on, but we can't change it by being afraid. We can change it by being empowered and stronger within ourselves, that we're self-reliant, we're confident in who we are.
I know that you work a lot with couples, and originally when you were going to come on the show, we were going to talk about your program, Grown Folks Conversation, which was African American men telling women what they really need. But I want to talk about that in the context of dealing with our spouses in this climate. What should we be looking for in our spouses so that we can, do a buddy check, if you will, and check in with each other? What should we be looking for? What should cause us concern? And how do we help?
I guess we should look for, first of all, we know that we are all affected by it, by what's going on in the world. So the check-in is very important, checking in with each other, showing concern, being more available to each other, and paying attention to the signs of distress. Some of the physical signs that we can see is that, you might hear your spouse say that they have aches and pains that are not explainable, physical symptoms that are not explainable, or if they are unusually tired. They're waking up and they're tired in the morning, waking up tired in the morning. Notable changes in sex drive. That's important to pay attention to the physical things like weight changes and changes in eating habits. Isolation, pay attention to, like we said earlier, sometimes going to the store, just walking outside, you have to make a decision. So, with COVID on top of it, people are already distancing themselves. But if you notice that your loved one is isolating, even at home, that's something to pay attention to, and that's a sign of emotional distress. So any strange behavior that does not match their normal behavior, you should be paying attention to that and talking about those things.
And should you encourage them to go get counseling, or is it okay to just encourage them to open up and talk to you? I mean, where do you know that they need more than just a conversation with you as their spouse?
Okay, so it is very important to have an open discussion. Whatever differences you have or whatever it is that may have happened should be put on the shelf for now, right now, because this is a critical time that we're in. So having checking in and then listening, not just checking in how you're doing and moving on, but paying attention to what's being said, what's in your heart, what's happening in your heart. What are they saying? What are they saying? Read between the lines. Listen to what emotions that you're hearing, and it's okay. And let them know that it's okay to have those feelings and express also what you're feeling. I'll say some of these, symptoms of distress are just a normal reaction to abnormal situations. So everything does not mean go to counseling immediately. But if it starts to interfere with their regular functioning and the things that, they need to do on a daily basis, or if you see it lingering on for more than a week, it is a good idea, especially the physical symptoms. You want to check in with a, medical professional, or, if you see some of the isolating or, some just the excessive sadness or the rage and anger reactions, those kind of things, then they should be checking in with a counselor.
Okay. I think we have time to get in one more call before we're almost done. Deborah joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Deborah. You're on the air.
Hey, how are you?
Okay.
Listen, I wanted to ask the professional that you're interviewing, what could I do? I'm sitting at home, retired CPS investigator. I want to know, what can I do to become the repairer of the breach? What examples or what format or what could I start or what movement could I begin? Because I think there are many people like me who want to do something to help and to bridge a gap and to become the repairer of the breach, but we don't know how to start or where to start. So I would like to ask just to give me some suggestions on how I could help.
Is this Deborah Brown? Hello, Deborah Brown. Thank you so much for calling in. Pam, go ahead and answer her question.
There's not an easy answer to that, because I think that we all have a role to play, and we should operate in our role. So in other words, stay in your lane. Whatever gift that you bring to the table, utilize it. And those gifts will emerge. You will know what to do if you spend time educating yourself, learning more about the history of America. So like most of us go to school and we get 1 month of Black history, and, the rest of history is more Anglo. So Black history is American history. So sit while you're there, and your desire and your passion that I'm hearing to do something about this will drive you to learn more. The more you learn, the more you understand about social engineering and how how America, all of, not even just America, the whole world has been manipulated to think a certain way about Black people. It's just and just continuously understand how America operates and how Black people have been are part of that operation and what's going on. There's so many things to check into and to look at how America benefits from the oppressed and racial profiling, and how the prison system benefit and how big corporations benefit from racial profiling. So take this time to educate yourself, to learn. Thank God we're in a time where there's social media, there's YouTube, there's Netflix, there's all kinds of documentaries that we can look into. And at the same time, when you hear any kind of any racial kind of connotations, backhanded compliments, like, when people say, I don't see color, or I think you're pretty for a Black girl. And so pay attention to those comments and check them when you hear them.
Absolutely. It has been such a pleasure, Ms. Pamela LaVeist Bell, talking with you today on our show. Thank you so much for joining us. Pamela LaVeist Bell is with Serenity Pastoral Counseling in Reisterstown, Maryland. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.
I'm with Marcellus, and you all are checking out Another View. Don't go anywhere. Check us out.
And welcome back. Just want to remind you, we've got a little less than 10 minutes before the end of our hour and our pledge challenge of $1,000. Call 1-800-940-7170. Join the WHRV family. Join the Another View family. Become a member. His name is Titus Kaphar. He is a prolific artist. His latest work was featured on the June 15th cover of Time magazine. It was the George Floyd cover labeled The Black Mother. He is also a featured artist at the Revolutionary War Museum at Yorktown's Forgotten Soldier exhibit. The museum just reopened this week, and the exhibit has been extended until July 8th. Our Lisa Godley first brought us the story of Titus Kaphar last October, and the video version of that story, seen on WHRO's Create 757, just won a Silver Telly Award and is nominated as a regional Emmy Award. Here's Lisa Godley now with an encore presentation of nationally acclaimed artist Titus Kaphar.
Titus Kaphar is a master at taking familiar images, those portraits that we've only ever seen one way, and forcing us to look at them differently. For example, his portrait titled Beyond the Myth of Benevolence was inspired by a famous portrait of Thomas Jefferson painted in 1800. But in Titus's version, the portrait is transformed into a curtain that partially covers an enslaved woman. Your eyes are immediately drawn to her brown skin, her green and gold headscarf, and her bare shoulder and leg. Titus says the goal is to shift your gaze.
When I say shifting the gaze, I'm imploring the viewer to set what feels natural aside for a moment and try a different route through the work. And when you do that through a painting, even a familiar painting, you might find something you never expected to find.
By putting Black faces into historic art, some argue that Titus Kaphar is trying to erase history.
Let's just think about that. Let's dig into that for a second. How would one go about that? Maybe what one would do is they would ignore the fact that for hundreds of years, there were people who actually were in that moment in history and participated in those battles, in those important historical moments, and they're not being remembered. So the irony of that accusation is that they don't recognize that I'm actually uncovering what was already there.
Whether it's a painting or a sculpture, the Michigan native works to reveal unspoken truths about American history, and it doesn't matter if it happened centuries ago or present day. Titus used a black asphalt background and white chalk to sketch the faces of Trayvon Martin, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, and Michael Brown, one on top of the other, to symbolize police brutality. Titus creates much of his work at his studio in Connecticut, but we caught up with him during the unveiling of his commissioned sculpture for the Forgotten Soldier exhibit at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown. Standing in the center of the room, your eyes are initially drawn to a large mold of George Washington. But Washington is not alone. Standing in front of him, superimposed on the glass, is the image of a black soldier.
My intention is that we see both of these characters at the same time. We have this tendency to kind of write our history thinking about those people sitting on that horse. But there's a lot of other characters, those soldiers on the ground, that actually give their lives for the battles. In this particular exhibition, we're talking about the black soldiers who were by and large forgotten to history, erased from history.
In 2017, he shared his passion for what he does in a TED Talk.
I want to make paintings, I want to make sculptures that are honest, that wrestle with the struggles of our past, but speak to the diversity and the advances of our present.
During that presentation, he used white paint and broad strokes to cover his replica of a painting that showed well-to-do people dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry. When he was done, only the enslaved youth who was standing attentively in the background was clearly seen.
We can look at institutional structural power, and we can look and see the ways in which history has been erased. It hasn't been erased by some random black dude in Connecticut making paintings and putting white paint on it. That ain't how it works.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Wow. It's his words spoken from last October and how relevant they are today. And that's our show for today. If you'd like to hear it again or listen to any other Another View program, go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. So guess what? We raised $2,372 in this hour. Yes, thank you to our listeners and to everyone who made their pledge of support for Another View and WHRV FM. We are so grateful. Now, you still have time. You can go to WHRO.org or you can call 1-800-940-7170 and join the WHRV family. We so appreciate you. And we are starting in July, our 10th year on the air. So thank you, Hampton Roads. Thank you, Eastern Virginia. Thank you to everybody across the globe that listens to Another View. We are so very grateful. Next week, the Another View crew is taking a break. In 2 weeks, we start our 10th year on the radio with the Another View Roundtable. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Jonah Gregowitz, producer and host of the podcast Lyrical, filled in for Lisa Godley. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Hamlee. Take good care of yourselves, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for the next edition of Another View.